Welcome to the writer reads The Strays of Lunar One, Book 1, The Unwilling, Chapter 29, Flight Transfer. Where are we going? Oliver asked. Same place I recommended before, Florrie answered shortly. A mining colony in an asteroid belt, but you won't be landing anywhere. We're going to hook you onto an ore freighter and catch a ride out. Oliver sighed and looked around the cockpit. So this is going to be home sweet home for a bit. It's bio setup, we'll deal with it, Florrie told him, and Oliver got the impression it had been told he'd better be able to deal with it too. This mining operation, Oliver began, but Florrie cut him off. 10 seconds to warp. You'd better strap in, she told him, leaving him to wonder if she was using circumstances to avoid his question. Ridiculous, he told himself. There's no reason for her not to tell you where you're headed. He tried to ignore the little voice that suggested Florrie might indeed have reasons to keep him in the dark about where they were going. She knew Odyssey, after all. He didn't bother trying to insist. The last thing he wanted to do was upset the woman remote piloting his shuttle. He wanted to arrive at wherever it was they were going, not find himself stuck somewhere in the middle of the warp. Even though he was very sure Florrie would do no such thing. He pulled the pilot's harness over his shoulders and buckled it tight, then leant back in the pilot's seat and closed his eyes. As much as he appreciated Florrie piloting, it left him nothing to do but sleep. Lewis could sleep until they arrived. Oliver's eyes snapped open. No, he couldn't. When they arrived, he was probably going to be needed up front in case something went wrong. Or something. His hand moved to the buckle. I wouldn't, Florrie told him, and the ship melted into warp. Oliver considered it, and then didn't. Technically, he could move around the ship while it was in warp, and he had done so before. It just wasn't pleasant. Nothing seemed quite real, and the surfaces shifted. Thinking about it, Oliver decided maybe he wouldn't pull Lewis out of the tank in the middle of a warp. That wouldn't be the nicest thing to do to his friend. He closed his eyes again and tried to figure out what he was going to do next. Florrie's voice woke him up. We're here. Oliver looked out of the cockpit and onto an entirely unfamiliar system. Their transporter hadn't dropped them in at the usual warp point, and he found himself being carried toward the edge of a densely populated asteroid belt. Oliver stared. He hadn't been aware there were small craft with that capability. Larger craft, yes, but shuttles this size? No. That's a new trick, he noted. Yes, Florrie agreed, and you can imagine my surprise when I discovered the hunters could afford this kind of tech. I knew they were good, but this level of sophistication suggests corporate ties. They said Ravelin won the bid. He paused, but Exarch told us they'd be taking us to Xanil. Florrie snorted. Ravelin can't outbid Xanil. They don't have that kind of financing. Yet. They're working on it, but they're not quite there. If the hunters were delivering you to Ravelin, then we know at least one of their ties. She paused, and Oliver stared out at the asteroid belt, picking out the small points of light that were small transports moving between the rocks floating ahead of him. The more he stared, the more signs of habitation he saw. This had to be one of the busiest mine sites he'd ever visited. What do they pull out of here? He asked. This belt has the usual precious metals, Florrie told him, but it's unusually rich in osmium, ruthenium, and rhodium. There are several covert wars currently ongoing for control. Is that why you don't want us to land here? You'd be picked up seconds after this ship was scanned and you were identified, and there are at least 3 parties present with that capability. 3? As I said, it is a very valuable body of ore, and there is a bounty for clearing a path to the planet. They can't reach it. They can, since this is a belt, but the most economical routes to the more desirable parts of its surface are untenable. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to concentrate while I find us a waiting point. Do you need me? Oliver asked. No. Are you decanting Lewis? Florrie wanted to know. I was going to. Your thoughts? It's a good idea, she told him. That way there would be 2 of you on deck if anything happened. Oliver unbuckled and slid out of his seat, catching sight of the shielding coming down over the cockpit windows. Florrie must have been observing him through the ship's surveillance system because she explained. We're entering an asteroid system, and the shields will block more scans than the plasteel. Oliver nodded. Gotcha. He left her to it, ignoring how wrong it felt to leave the cockpit unmanned, or the deep sense of unease that came with stepping out of it. If Florrie wanted to take control and lock them away from the controls, there was very little he could do to stop her. Besides, they were in her hands. If he couldn't trust her now, he'd have been better off taking Odyssey's offer. The last time he'd looked, that company hadn't condoned slavery. In the meantime, he tapped the regen tank, pulling Lewis out of the light stasis he'd used to keep the changeling calm while the tank did its work. He was cooking another meal when the lid popped and his friend emerged. "Where are we?" the man asked. "Asteroid belt. Florrie's looking to hitch us to a freighter out of here." "Alpha 9?" Lewis wanted to know. Oliver glanced over his shoulder, serving steak onto 2 plates as he shrugged. "I don't know. I think her main concern is to get us off the radar." "We docking?" Lewis asked. Oliver shook his head. "Apparently the belt is hotly contested and we'd be picked up very quickly." Lewis relaxed at that, taking the plate of replicated steak and potatoes. Oliver passed him. He looked around before sitting in one of the flight couches and pulling down the tray table from the seat in front. Oliver took a seat across the aisle and the two of them ate in silence. "How are you feeling?" Oliver asked when he was done. Lewis held up a thumb, but didn't stop chewing. About halfway through his last steak, he stopped and looked around. "Where's Gabe?" Oliver gave him a feral grin. "He's in stasis, and the regen pod in storage." Lewis's eyebrows rose. "There's a stasis pod in storage? What did I miss?" Florrie interrupted before Oliver could reply. "Please place your tray tables in their upright positions and stand by for covert attachment." "Covert attachment?" Lewis asked, and Florrie answered. "Most ships don't like unauthorized objects attached to their hulls," she said. "This one is fitted with the necessary tech for it to go undetected." "No chance of detection?" Lewis was skeptical, "because the countermeasures for that are fairly advanced." "That will depend on the ship," Florrie replied, "but I don't have time to hack each and every one to check. Your hunters just jumped into the system, and Ravlin has activated its local office. One of you needs to go through this thing and stop it squawking." "It's squawking?" "It wasn't, but the hour we spent with the drives cut has activated a subroutine my software didn't detect." "That's not good," Oliver told her. "Precisely. Now, if you'll excuse me." Oliver and Lewis exchanged glances and then got out of their seats, dumping the remains of their meal into waste storage. They reached the cockpit together, Lewis taking the co-pilot's seat and buckling in as Oliver settled into the pilot's chair. "We need the shielding?" the changeling asked. "You definitely need the shielding," Florrie replied as their weight shifted with the shuttle's movement. "Sorry, this is going to be interesting." "I'd prefer boring," Oliver told her, but she didn't reply. He reached out and tapped the control that would bring up the display reflecting what they'd usually see from the cockpit. Lewis startled back in his seat. "That thing is enormous." Oliver nodded. "Just find me what details you can on the ship. I'll research the company it belongs to. Might give us a heads up if things go." The cockpit shuddered and dizziness passed over him in a sudden wave. Oliver groaned, registering when the shuttle's engines cut and the small craft began to drift. As he felt the vibration from something taking the shuttle in its grip, he tried to unbuckle. The freighter's next defense measure rolled through them like a freight train, and he fell into an abyss of black, the sound of something attaching to the hull echoing through his head. Oliver woke to someone prodding his shoulder with their finger. His head felt like someone was trying to dig their way out of it, and his mouth was dry. "Fuck off, Lewis," he muttered, brushing irritably at the prodding digit. Instead of stopping, Lewis dug his finger in. Oliver snarled, registering metal as the finger lifted and settled against the side of his head. His eyes snapped open and he took a sharp breath, which caught in his throat and made him cough. Gods, he hoped the guy holding the trigger didn't shoot him by mistake. To his relief, the gun lifted and he coughed until the dryness eased. Only when he'd finished did he turn his head. "That's far enough." The female voice that reached him was as hard as any combat vet's. "Sit still and put your hands on your head." Lewis groaned, and Oliver caught the shift of movement as someone moved toward the man. "Don't," he warned. "He's a chap." An armored figure grabbed Lewis by the shoulder just as the woman behind Oliver swore, pivoted, and shot him. Oliver stared in disbelief and then started to turn. which was when she shot him, too. Coming round a second time wasn't an improvement on the first. For one thing, he was cuffed to the bed. Oliver opened his eyes. Secondly, he was no longer on the shuttle. At least no one was trying to jackhammer their way out of his skull. He groaned and tried to prop himself up on his elbows. He hadn't noticed the band over his head. Great, he moaned. Lou? I'm here. The changeling's voice was gravelly with pain. You okay? Tied down, but fine. What happened? Lewis asked. Looks like they had better countermeasures than the shuttle's tech could handle, Oliver told him. Florrie? Don't know. Did someone get the number of that freighter? Oliver managed a dry-mouthed chuckle, but it ended in another coughing fit. Lewis waited until he was done and then asked, Do you reckon they'll let us go? We can only ask. What are the chances they don't know? Lewis began. Sweet, fuck, and all, Oliver told him shortly. There was no point in getting the man's hopes up. The changeling sighed. What are the chances they won't take the bounty? I don't know. All we can do is ask. As he spoke, the compartment door opened. Lewis Havisham, Oliver Landstrom, said a new voice. Oliver looked toward it, but couldn't see the woman's face. Yes, he answered. She came into view. How do you feel? Like someone hit my ship with an EMP burst, followed it up with something less friendly to the organics aboard, and then shot me with a stunner, he creaked, taking her in. She was handsome, too determined to be pretty, her face set in stern, angular lines, her dark hair pulled back. She didn't seem amused by his reply. Oliver briefly returned her gaze and then looked past her. How's the pup? Mr. Havisham? She asked, giving his friend a brief glance, her answer unsympathetic. He'll survive. She came closer and looked down at him. Since you're aware we know your identity, let me answer your questions. We're not bounty hunters, and our schedule is too tight for the sorts of shenanigans either Ravlin or Zanel are likely to pull collecting you. Oliver frowned and she sighed. I won't be boarded and have my crew threatened, she explained shortly, and I'd rather not annoy Odyssey any more than you already have. Oliver's eyes widened. Odyssey? He creaked. Yes, that is their man you had in stasis in the storage compartment, isn't it? From the tone of her voice, it wasn't a question, and she wasn't happy. Oliver closed his eyes and nodded. Odyssey. Again. What are you going to do? He asked. To answer your question, once Odyssey tells me their side of the story, I'll decide whether or not I'll let you go, or if I need to hand you back to them, since I'm guessing their agent didn't volunteer to be put in the tank. Did he? Oliver groaned and closed his eyes again. Not exactly. I didn't think so. She stayed beside him, and Oliver opened his eyes again, wondering what she wanted. You haven't asked me what I'm going to do about the Justiciars. Oliver swallowed nervously. And? They said you turned your friend without his permission, she told him, and waited. Oliver nodded, his face flushing. He was dying. They also said he wouldn't have agreed. There was a girl. And you didn't think he had a right to choose? She challenged. Oliver shook his head and looked away. No, I didn't think she had a right to choose for him. And? The woman demanded, and he looked back, sadness washing over him. He is the only pack I have. Oliver hadn't meant to admit that where Lewis could hear it, but it was the only other reason he could give. He hadn't expected the understanding he saw in the captain's eyes. She clasped his shoulder, squeezing gently. I'll take that into consideration when making my decision. Oliver twisted his head, trying to follow her as she left. She paused by the door. You're confined to quarters and cut off from the ship's systems. Gesturing to the timepiece on the wall, she added, We go to warp in an hour. Make sure you're back in your bunks by then. Back in our bunks? Oliver thought. Is she kidding? We can't even leave our bunks. The door hissed closed, and he heard the locks take hold. Confined to quarters does not mean confined to my bunk, he grumbled, and Lewis laughed. At least it's not all bad news, he said. Oliver was trying to think of a response that wouldn't send the man spiraling into despair when the cuffs around his feet released and the band across his chest undid and retracted.